We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Welcome to my very first solo episode of the Paring Down podcast. I am Shannon Leyko, your host extraordinaire. No, not really. Just a good old-fashioned host. And I am excited to do some of these solo episodes once in a while. I think I'm going to focus on different areas of the house that I have decluttered myself, or I'm working on decluttering in my own life, or are a challenge for me, and just kind of talk through the approaches that I take in hopes that you will be able to implement that into your own decluttering and minimizing journey when it comes to our stuff. Because as much as we're going to eventually branch out of simplicity beyond just our possessions, I do think that our spaces affect every other area of our lives. So I always want to draw inspiration back from the very active behavior that is decluttering and organizing. For me, it's therapeutic and I love doing it. So I'm excited to share more of those specifics in my own life with you that you can turn on as background motivation while you're on your own decluttering journey. But for today, I figured a good place to start would be to kind of tell you a little bit about my own journey when it comes to paring down my life, specifically my stuff. Because you're probably like, well, why exactly are you hosting a podcast about minimalism or paring down or simplifying or whatever terminology you want to give it? And the answer is not that I am an expert. It is not that I have been trained in this area. I don't do anything in the organizational world for a living. I am just a mom of three, of a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old who really has seen major changes in my life because of decluttering, simplifying, and just streamlining the things that I own. And I'm not the only one with this story whatsoever, but I do think all of our stories are a little bit unique. Those of us who have chosen to begin the process, the lifelong process of being intentional about what we own, especially in Western consumerism type culture, right? This is not something that will ever, you're never going to be completely perfect at it. There will always be new things coming into our homes. There'll be different seasons of life, different stages of life. We have little people and spouses and roommates or whatever that we live with. So we're not in total control of what comes into our homes. And I just think there's constant room for evaluation and flexibility and figuring out what's working in each specific season. But I'm excited to share with you kind of where we are currently and how we got here. And by we, I mean my family, but mostly me. And we are a military family. We are a Coast Guard family specifically. My husband is a commander in the Coast Guard. So we move every 3 years usually. We currently live in Florida. We lived in Alaska before here. So being aware of our things not only is helpful when it comes to moving across the country every 3 years, like packing up a house, it's pretty clear pretty quickly what you want to take with you and what you don't. So it's kind of nice. We have that built-in accountability every couple of years, but it's also a bit of a challenge because obviously weather-wise, Florida is an extremely different place than Alaska. The Coast Guard was like not super into smooth transitions. They were like, let's see how you can handle a 180. So obviously I'm not going to wear my sweaters while I am here, but I'm also not going to declutter all of my winter clothes because for all we know, we'll be back in Alaska in 3 years or somewhere else that's cold or that has at least 4 seasons, unlike here. So those of you who are watching this will notice that I do my podcast in my closet for a variety of reasons. Not the most important one is definitely that my children are loud creatures. And there's nowhere else in this home that I could potentially hide from them if I'm ever recording while they're home and Aaron's watching them. So the closet it is, but it also feels like an appropriate backdrop considering what we're talking about. And you will see that my closet is not a traditional minimalist closet. There's not like 3 white t-shirts and 4 different colored like beige pants that you could just mix and match. I love color. I love style. All of those things are important to me. And so that's why I really look at minimalism and simplifying and paring down as something that's so unique and specific to each one of us. Okay, so back to my little story here about how this became so important to me. My mom growing up, I would say, was pretty minimal. She never used that term, and I don't think she would identify with that term, but I can look back, at my childhood, and I remember there never being much of a mess, or we never had an overabundance of things. Our living spaces were always tidy. I remember my mom vacuuming, and I definitely remember in my teenage years, my mom always saying, if you don't have somewhere to put it, you have too much stuff. She always would say that. I'd be like, Mom, she'd say, go clean your room. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with all this. I don't know where to put this shirt. And she's like, it's not that you don't have enough space. It's that you have too much stuff. So I think that's always been ingrained in me. And I always have found like great satisfaction in cleaning and organizing a space. But I was not naturally intrinsically motivated to do it. It was usually my mom being like, this has to happen. And then afterwards I'd feel so good, So then when I went to live by myself in college, I was not tidy. Nope. Not even a little bit. My college roommates, I'm sure, would be happy to tell you just how gross I was. I don't know. I just didn't hang out my clothes and they would kind of just be strewn about. And I owned more than I needed. And especially my senior year when I was a singer at Busch Gardens theme park. Hey, I was making, decent money and still in school. And so I was fortunate that my schooling was paid for by my grandparents. Oh, such a blessing. And so I did save some of that money, but I also spent like a fair amount of it at Forever 21 because I could, and I was dumb. And I was like, all these cute clothes, So definitely was not a minimalist. And after that, I ended up moving to New York City shortly after college. And that, I would say, is kind of where I began to pare down. I would say that makes sense because, as you know, living in New York is living in shoeboxes when you're 23. Yeah, I was 23 when I moved up there. And so I first shared a bedroom for a year, 2 different bedrooms with a girlfriend that I moved up there with. And again, I wasn't like the cleanest, but I am not. If I'm in a shared space with someone, I try and be respectful. So I didn't have that much stuff. I don't remember our apartment getting gross and dirty, like with my clothes everywhere. So I'm sure I was like fine. And we each had one little closet. And that's what I lived out of, with a couple bins under the bed. And then I moved into a studio apartment all by myself, which was the best. I know some people don't like living alone, but man, I loved it. I love living alone. I mean, I love my husband and my kids too, but I also really like being alone. And so I definitely started kind of getting rid of stuff and having more fun organizing and cleaning my own space and being proud of where I lived. But I would say for sure, my dive into paring down began after my first child. So I started noticing how stuff added to my anxiety after I got married, because my sweet, wonderful husband, who will be on here doing an episode with me about what it's like to, I don't know, I shouldn't say I don't know, I do know, incorporate paring down in a partnership where maybe one person has a different expectation for paring down things than the other, and how to work as a team and how to change perspectives and, get on the same page and compromise a little bit when it comes to paring down our homes. But anyways, when I married him, he had a huge storage container. What are they called? A storage closet? It's not a closet. Like one of those places you go and you drive up to, and it's a storage unit. That was the word I was looking for. He had like essentially a 2-car garage storage unit full of stuff. I mean, I kind of get it, right? He had at one point lived in a home and then had downsized into living with his current roommate when we met, who he was basically just renting one room out of this person's house. And so he had to put his furniture and things somewhere. But we got married and I was like, I don't want to pay for a storage unit of stuff. So we moved everything out of that into our 2-car garage of the house that we had bought together. And it was full from front to back, from left to right, from top to bottom of stuff. I mean, stuff that had no reason that it should have ever been turned into stuff to begin with. I don't even remember half the stuff that was in there. Like, definitely an ex-girlfriend's old rocking chair and like lots of random board games with pieces missing. And I mean, there were pictures that he had taken in high school, but like bins and bins and bins from photography club and just so much stuff. And I was like, Erin, this is too much. I'm not comfortable with the fact that like I have to squeeze to get myself to the washer and dryer in our garage. That was not working for me. So we like slowly did our best to start tackling it. I got pregnant. We found out we were pregnant the day we were moving into that house. So, I wasn't able to be as hands-on with decluttering during my pregnancy. And then you have a newborn, and I almost died as a newborn mom. I did not sleep. Erin was out to sea half the year on a boat. And dealing with that garage was like not part of my lifestyle at that point. And so it got slightly better, like over the 3 years that we lived in that home. He was able to chip at it with my encouragement, but it was still a lot. And then you bring in all the kid stuff that you get with your newborn baby. You're like, this baby is like a foot tall, and it comes with everything from a bath that you put in the sink to 1,000 different outfits to crib sheets and toys and safety devices and more toys and bottles and food that comes in little containers. And I mean, it's endless. And I look back and I'm like, I don't know how anyone is mentally healthy with a newborn. That sounds terrible. And some people love the newborn stage. But not only was I not sleeping, I was also just like more overwhelmed than ever by all the extra stuff in the house and not knowing what was useful, what I needed, what I didn't. I thought I needed it all, like every first time parent does. And yeah. So then we were moving to Alaska 3 years later. At this point, we had a toddler. I was pregnant with baby number 2, and I was like pretty determined to do things differently the second time around. And so we downsized. Our house in Virginia Beach was like 1,900 square feet, I want to say. And the home we were renting in Alaska was 1,400 square feet, 3-bedroom instead of 4. Were originally in a 4-bedroom. And just much smaller in general. So we were downsizing. I knew that I didn't like all this stuff, but I hadn't started researching and listening to podcasts and reading books about minimalism. Like, I still don't think I really knew the word minimalism other than just like Swedish furniture, I think was my interpretation of that word. So, I saw that we had a 1-car garage, and we managed to get all of our stuff, most of the stuff, from our 2-car garage in Virginia into this 1-car garage in Alaska. But I didn't love it. I didn't love that it was still pretty chock-a-block in there. And I knew, and it was hanging over my head, that we had a storage unit still, because the Coast Guard, when you move to Alaska, it's considered an overseas job. So they will actually pay for long-term storage for anything you don't want to bring with you. So we did put some stuff in there, like some of my mom's old antique furniture that had been in our home in Virginia Beach that we knew there wasn't a place for in our rental in Alaska. Some sentimental tubs full of stuff, even like our bikes, which looking back, I don't know, was probably a fine decision. We didn't live in a place in Alaska where you could really ride a bike easily from our home. So, but I knew we had a storage unit, and our garage was full, and I was like, and we're having another baby. And I was like, this is feeling so heavy to me. So I really focused on toys in Alaska. I would say that's where I really pared down our toys for our kids and focused on that area, because the kitchen was something that I felt like is Aaron's domain, and he's very sensitive about his kitchen appliances and utensils. So I knew that wasn't a good place for me to start. Clothing wise, I would say that's a hard place for me even now to declutter. I'm better at it. And I will do a whole podcast episode about decluttering our clothes, but it's sensitive to me because my weight has gone up and down and up and down and up and down since having kids. My whole life, I was like between 130 and 140 pounds pretty much my whole life. I would just stay in that 10-pound range. And then I gained like 70 pounds with Anders, lost most of it, gained another 70 when I had Josephine. And so I felt like I didn't have anything in my closet that fit, or if it did, it eventually wouldn't. But then, I don't know, it's just been tough. So I didn't focus on clothes. I didn't feel like that was a healthy place for me to start in Alaska, because I was postpartum. Like, I gave birth to Joe 4 months after we moved. And so toys felt like a really manageable place to start. And it felt great to get everything into these little bins in our living room. We had a very small living room with the most beautiful view you could possibly imagine. And we had like 6 little cubes underneath the window. And I was like, if the toys don't fit in there, and then in this one drawer in the like dining kind of space, we had this built-in bar situation that had drawers, and the kids inevitably open the drawers anyway. So I was like, might as well fill one with clothes. But I was like, if it doesn't fit in these 6 bins and this drawer, I don't want it. I don't want it. And we had a bookshelf, and that was it. So I got rid of like some bigger items. We had, one of those awesome kid builder situations where they can like hammer things in and they stand at this building station. And our kids rarely used it except for the hammer to try and like kill each other or hit the dog, And I was like, this is cute, but this can donate to their daycare, which I did. And it was a really great lesson living in a smaller square footage while our family was growing, to be really cognizant about the kids stuff that I was allowing into our homes. While we were in Alaska, we went from 1 kid to 3 kids in 3 years, in a 3-bedroom house. So, you just really don't have much of a choice except to be really specific. But I would say toys was pretty much the only thing besides the garage that I put a lot of effort towards. I mean, the rest of the house still looked nice, like on the outside, and I liked to organize the craft closet, and I made sure things were organized, but I wouldn't say I pared down a ton while we were in Alaska, other than the garage and the toys. But I think it was while I was living in Alaska that I watched that documentary on Netflix called The Minimalists. And that's when it clicked. I was like, this is what has always mattered to me, because despite me not knowing what the terminology was or even implementing it super well into my life, I've never been super attached to things. I think, again, a reflection of my mom. And the more I think about it, the more I know that that was ingrained in me, whether I realized it or not. I'm just becoming consciously aware of it now, basically. But I have never been into name brands. I've always had a really, I think, healthy view of things and stuff. And I've always felt frustrated with stuff. Like, I've always just felt like, why do we put so much purpose into inanimate objects and to things? And like, none of it matters. Even style, which I do feel matters in the sense that it can affect how you feel about yourself when you put clothes on that reflect who you are. Like, I'm a very colorful person, and I don't know, I really enjoy style, and I really enjoy home decor, and I enjoy all of those things. But ultimately, I really don't feel that attached to it. And so when I watched this minimalist documentary, I was like, this makes so much sense to me. And it helped open my eyes to my spending and like the consumerism that silently takes over us in Western culture, that doesn't actually make us happy, right? It just like adds to what we have to be responsible for. And as human beings, I just don't feel like we were made to be responsible for this much stuff. It's just so much more work. It really is. Like, the more stuff you have is just the more stuff you have to take care of and deal with and find a home for and then forget about and then be mad that you forgot about it. And it's silly. So when I moved to Florida last year, I was pretty miserable. I've not been shy about explaining that to people, that Florida it's been a tough year for me. Alaska was my vibe. It was slow. It was quiet. It was secluded. I know we went through a pandemic when we lived there, but that also was like kind of up my alley from a personal, like, personality standpoint. Sign me up to be a hermit. Honestly, I'm down. So moved from I'm a cold weather person, cold, beautiful mountain, lovely Alaska, to hot Florida with no seasons, and way less childcare help for many different reasons, and a big giant echoey house that's 2,500 square feet instead of 1,400 square feet, which most people would be excited about. I was actually kind of resentful toward. I pretty quickly regretted buying our home here after moving in, not because it's not a gorgeous house in a safe neighborhood, which, frankly, when you are a military family and you're trying to choose a house sight unseen, you just take the word of the people that live there that you've gotten in touch with, and you're like, what's a good neighborhood? And you just kind of roll with it, unless you have the funds and the time to fly out ahead of time and try and find a spot. But the military doesn't pay for you to fly out ahead of time and find a spot. So we weren't going to pay $1 bajillion to do that. And so we went sight unseen. And when you're doing that, you try and eliminate as many potential pitfalls as possible. And so we got a house that we knew for sure was in a great neighborhood, and it's a relatively new house that wasn't falling apart. And we trusted our realtor, and we got exactly what we wanted at that time. And I will always be grateful for this house, because there are a lot of great things about it. Like our neighborhood is great and our neighbors are fantastic. And the school Anders is in is wonderful. But I got here and I was like, I don't want this big house. 2,500 square feet for me feels big. I felt like I didn't want our stuff to just spread out and quantify. That's absolutely not the correct word. Multiply probably is what I'm looking for. And so I don't know. I was like, this isn't going to work for me. So last year shortly after we got here, I listened to my favorite nonfiction writer's book called Simple and Free. Her name's Jen Hatmaker, by the way. Someday I will interview her on this podcast. That's my dream someday. But anyway, she wrote a book that was originally called Seven, and then she rebranded it as Simple and Free a year or two ago. And basically she went through 7 different areas of life that she simplified for a month at a time. So she only ate 7 foods for a month, 7 specific foods for a month. She only wore 7 items of clothing for a month. She only spent money on 7 different things for a month. Really interesting book and biblically based, kind of searching what does a life of Jesus, a simple life of Jesus look like, because if you look at this from a biblical standpoint as well, which I am a Christian, I am a disciple, a follower of Christ in my own life. This doesn't have to be a requirement to want to pare down your life, but it certainly aligns with how Jesus lived his life and in many ways how he calls us to live our life, not attached to the things of this earth, storing up our treasures in heaven, counting the cost, leaving things behind. I mean, the scriptures reflect a life of simplicity, big time. So I really enjoyed that perspective in her book as well. I also read a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. Again, it's a Christian-based book about eliminating hurry in your life. And one aspect of that too muchness is your stuff. And again, felt convicted on a spiritual level. What am I offering my time and my energy toward? Why do I have all this stuff? And also, is it creating more choices and more mental load and exhaustion for me? I was having such a struggle living here in Florida. And I realized that one thing that brought me a sense of control and peace was when I started really addressing the stuff that we own as it came into our home, as we were unpacking it. And not only the moving trucks that came from Alaska, but then the stuff that had been in that long-term storage for 3 years showed up at our doorstep. We were like, okay, now we have to address all of this as well. And I was like, I'm done. I'm over it. I had read the books. I had watched the podcast or read the book, watched the documentary. I gobbled up, tidy up with Marie Kondo. I've also listened to her book, actually back in Alaska. I listened to her book. So I did start this journey, I would say, of intentionality back in Alaska. But it was when we got here that I felt like I had the space to implement it and needed to implement it for my mental health. I was just so stressed. And the more I got rid of, the lighter I felt. I mean, it wasn't just a physical lightness. It was like a spiritual and mental and physical in myself, biological, anatomy and anatomical. I don't know if that's a word, but I think it is. It was an anatomical lightness. Oh my gosh. Anyway, and so since I've been in Florida, I've really just taken the bull by the horns with paring down. And it's become such a passion of mine that for years I've wanted to start a podcast. I used to have one actually that kind of coincided with my blog that I've had for 11 or 12 years at this point. And I just never found an umbrella of a subject that I felt like I would be passionate about for long enough that I could spread into a forever podcast. And so we've been sitting on this podcast equipment, which is a whole nother story as to why we have all this podcast equipment. But a story that actually involves me being mad because of my I wanted to pare down our stuff and simplify. And I actually really wanted to get rid of all this podcasting stuff. And Aaron insisted we kept it. And so here we are. I'm so glad we kept it. So sometimes it does pay off not to get rid of certain things. Know thyself, though, because yeah. Okay. That's funny that kind of played into this. But yeah, I realized this is something that I would love to share with the world. I want to share this message with everyone about how much less stress I feel, how much these mindsets about the things we own affect how we move through the world, not only in how we live in our spaces. I mean, obviously, there's been studies that show that our spaces very much affect our stress levels, but what I'm passing on to my kids in terms of what's important to them. Also, freeing up time. Like I have so much more time to do things I love, like a podcast, because I'm not managing as much stuff. Like I don't have a bajillion toys I'm constantly trying to clean. I mean, sometimes I feel like I do, because we do have a playroom here, which I'll address in another episode. I do think these solo episodes are going to be kind of addressing different rooms or different categories. So I want to have a playroom episode. But things, generally speaking, are very manageable in the house now. It's been over a year since we've lived here. The garage still needs a lot of work. I feel like that's a project that will never be done. Started 8 years ago when I got married, almost 8 years ago. And it's still ongoing, but we're working on it. But the rest of the house is in decent shape. There are little things here and there. There's like an office closet I want to organize, but I've gone through it a couple times. It's mostly decluttered. It's just not organized. And I think that's kind of where I am. Our house is pretty decluttered at this point. I've gone through my clothes multiple times every couple months because, every few months, if you go through your stuff, you'll realize you've worked out the muscle of decluttering enough that you see more things you want to declutter that like a month ago I wasn't ready to let go of. And then if I look at it today, I'm ready to let go of it. It's a slow process because it does take practice and it does take strengthening that decluttering muscle. But I'm comfortable and excited with the idea that this is a lifelong learning process, paring down our stuff, because I enjoy the process. It is satisfying. I mean, come on, you guys know there's nothing more satisfying than when you like get rid of a ton of stuff and organize your space, and all of a sudden you like walk in and get that immediate satisfaction of like a nice looking closet or a clean bedroom. Or I just like putting my kids' clothes away. I love walking into my daughter's closet knowing that she only has, 10 dresses hanging in her closet and her drawers are not overstuffed, and every single item of clothing that is there gets worn. I don't know. That brings me a lot of joy. And so I'm totally cool with the fact that like our house isn't totally done and it will never be totally done. But that's a good thing because that means I get to choose intentionality over and over and over again. And isn't that what being intentional is anyway? It's consistent awareness of what you're doing, what you're keeping, what you believe in, what you want for your life, what you're going to be doing next. And so for that reason, I think the fact that paring down our things doesn't come to an end doesn't need to feel overwhelming. It can be exciting because it's a really healthy and growth-filled way to live. I see my kids playing way more independently with so many fewer toys and choices in their lives. I've seen our finances, our spending habits change. I used to be like the Target girl and the Starbucks girl, which don't get me wrong. Like I'm never going to not love Target and Starbucks, obviously, but I make my Starbucks at home, which kind of started in the pandemic because, you couldn't go anywhere and it was a real financial saver. But I don't go to Target just to like walk around and buy random stuff. I go to Target sometimes, usually not even as much anymore, because I don't want to just buy random stuff, random cute things. So I'll just go to Walmart because it doesn't inspire me to buy cute things as much. I mean, actually, you guys, their kids' clothing section at Walmart has been trumping the kids' clothing section at Target lately, FYI. But, it's not as like cute of a shopping experience. So I'm not going out for the cute shopping experience anymore. So I'm not spending excess money. And it's been a real financial saver in that way because I don't want to bring in more stuff to the house because I don't want to manage it. I've become a library fanatic. I mean, I joined the library in Alaska too, but like, man, since moving here to Florida, I have read a book a week. And this year, my goal was to not spend a single dollar on books. And I am on book like number 38, 40, 42. Honestly, don't know. Somewhere in the upper 30s or low 40s so far in my book count this year. And I haven't spent a single dollar on a book. Isn't that great? It's so satisfying. I love it. I love it. I love everything about the library. And so there's just so many things that like I've seen the benefits of how decluttering affects our lives. I mean, Aaron and I just bought a camper van. You guys, we're going to go on these really fun road trips. We're a road trip family. And I feel totally comfortable with the amount of stuff we can fit in a van and live off of because I've gotten so used to living with so little. I mean, I want to sell it all or donate it all. I really do. So that's kind of our story, my story of minimalism. I think is a reflection, you know, by the time you're 35, like I am, you start to really see the lessons your parents taught you take shape in your life. I think it's interesting how we end up like that. Like you can go through your 20s and your teenage years and your 20s and your parents are probably pulling their hair out like, where did they go wrong? And then by the time you're in your mid 30s, a lot of us are like, wait, why am I my mother? You know, like, how did this happen? And I think if my mom were still alive, she'd be so proud and excited to know that her life really instilled in me a sense of not being attached to items, to inanimate objects and things that just won't fill your soul, can't take with you to heaven, and are not really what the meaning of life is, which is love, which is relationships, which is deep fulfillment and spiritual depth. And I mean, you just don't, the joy that you get from stuff is fleeting. I want joy that is consistent and deep and strong and can continue even during hard moments. And I know that flexing in this muscle, like working this muscle of minimalism, is offering me fortitude, is offering me the chance to be so intentional and proud of how I'm raising my kids, even though I mess up all the time. And I often think I'm the worst mom in the world because I guess that's like a pretty common feeling. But, you know, I know that my kids are going to wake up at age 35 and be like, oh, yeah, I guess our house was never that cluttered either, you know? And I want them to not be attached to stuff. And I want them to find their fulfillment elsewhere and know that the way that the world defines success is not true success. And I'm so glad that it's come full circle from my childhood to where I am now, even though I've not been on this perfectly linear version or journey towards minimalism. I'm really excited for where we are right now. And I have a lot of room to grow. And I'm excited to take you on that journey with me, to talk to so many other professionals and experts and people who are growing too in this little simplifying, paring down world. It's full of really intentional people. And those are my favorite kinds of people. So I'm excited to share them with you on the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And I just hope that my story resonates with you and maybe helps you think through what season you're in and identify things that might be stressing you out and maybe take the plunge a little bit deeper into simplicity, minimizing, and paring down your life. So thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you soon. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face, so thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at Paring Down Podcast, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.